Alrighty, so thank you all for being here today. We've got our ad hoc attendance boundaries committee meeting.
Yes, tell people how to participate.
Rob, you're going to go first and share with everyone to participate.
Good morning. If you'd like to speak today, for the first 15 minutes of the meeting, please click the hand icon on your screen, and you'll be invited to give your name, association to the district, and your school. And we will allow you to come in at the end of the meeting for hearing of the public. If you're in the room, just go ahead and indicate at the end of the meeting with your name, association, and that you'd like to speak during the speaking of the public session. Thank you.
The first item on our agenda is the election of an ad hoc attendance boundaries committee chair.
If I could, I'd like to nominate the good doctor to be chair. And so that's my nomination.
Yeah. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so that's moved.
Now we have to vote.
So let's vote. So all in favor of the nomination on the floor?
By acclamation.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, so it's official. So
Yes.
Forgive me, everybody that's listening and that's here. I'm new to this, so I'm going to be looking to these two to mentor me and asking a lot of questions. So, second item on our agenda is the board's charge to the ad hoc attendance boundaries committee, and I'm going to defer that to my colleague, Board Member Bolton, to kind of give some historical perspective as to why we are even having this ad hoc committee meeting.
Okay, great. And I think first, most importantly, the charge is broad, but is not necessarily as broad as it may become based upon whatever we research and figure out. The charge is specifically to review and evaluate attendance boundaries of our elementary schools, and that would include as well as schools that are not neighborhood schools like Montessori, or for example, our Montessori or some of our magnets. So it is to review that with, I think, with an understanding that several years ago, when we formed the Clifton area neighborhood school CANS, one of the efforts that was made was to go by, to a certain extent, since it was a new school, go by the city established neighborhood boundaries that are recognized by both the the community and recognized by city council. And that work that I think we put together 3 or 4 different neighborhoods up in the north central part and up on the hill, as well as Spring Grove, Spring Grove and Cuff areas on either side of Clifton Top, if you will. And then the reality there was that would hopefully create some stability, solidarity, and also answer some of the neighborhood questions, as well as take some of the pressure off of one of the schools that was already in Clifton, which was a magnet school, which some people in Clifton had begun to think for sure that it was a neighborhood school, and that's Fairview, German. So that sort of got people thinking and talking about, well, the last time that we have done this sort of review of some of these attendance boundaries is, when we opened back up Hyde Park School, there was some discussion there. When we've established LEAP over on the west side, there was some effort being made there as to what that would include, and it ended up being not a neighborhood school as much as a kind of magnet. And the real reality too is that we've not really readjusted or reaffirmed or even reevaluated the attendance boundaries as it pertains especially to the FMP. And with the facilities master plan, which was a reshaping of the whole district geographically and programmatically, there was work done in parts and pieces of the FMP, but not as it finished out.. The other part of that is that We have a different number of neighborhood schools than we did before, a different number of magnet schools. We actually have, I think, fewer magnet schools than we had some 10 years or so ago. Plus, we also found out, as we've known for quite some time, that the transportation budget is not really sustainable as it exists now, which this coming year it'll be at least $50 million to transport our kids, both, the kids with special needs in PK and then the rest of the kids K-12. So that's another area. And also when some of these boundaries were drawn, and this is something legal counsel will have to help us with, and I think in policy they kind of alluded to it, which was when some of these attendance boundaries, if not all of them, for the most part, were drawn, there were different federal regulations as to how attendance boundaries had to be drawn, and that there was a racial makeup that was part of the effort. And now those sorts of, really now, but in the last decade or so, that has changed significantly as well as to whether or not you can do that. And I would say this is final, but it's the final thing I'll speak about on this one, is that we've also now, since all of this has occurred, we've now concluded our 3-year strategic plan. And parts of the strategic plan had to do with some items that are part of both the growth model and also part of the program inventory or program portfolio, which is probably a better way to look at it. So that's some of the reasons we're here. Hey, buddy. And since we have this opportunity, I think the starting point was going to be our elementary attendance boundaries.
Yes, ma'am, Board. Thank you so much, Board Member Bolton.
Well,
Board Member Jones?
As Ms. Bolton, as eloquent and as always as she is in explaining this, I'm still pretty confused about what our charge is. And as you all know, and I've been very vocal in our board meetings about, why are we doing it now? What is it exactly that we're looking at? Wanting some historical perspective. And I do agree with Ms. Bolton that I know that we've had various discussions about attendance boundaries, but I think it will, and I know it's on the agenda to give a historical context of it, because my recollection of it is that it started out as something a little bit different and then evolved into the area that was under the listed as a goal under the strategic plan in optimized capabilities and around growth. So I think it would behoove us to really work through the historical context of that, because my concern is the strategic plan, we went through a reset of that based on COVID. And so we're now, I don't want to feel like we're sort of picking up where we left off. Mm-hmm. I want to feel like that what we're doing is really high priority for the district, that it's feasible for us to do it given the impact of COVID and everything else that has happened to us. And so part of that discussion around the historical context has to include where we started for. And I'm happy to see I'm happy to see all of our visitors here, but Mr. Davis can remember when we first start talking about this kind of plan, it had a different context. And the context, I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, had to do more with what was then called the Meridian Plan, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It started out as a Meridian Plan where we talked about dividing the district into 4 quadrants. Mm-hmm. And so our initial strategic plan was around that. And then where I think it got confused is that the emphasis switched from being focused on what that original charge was, and it sort of morphed into looking at capacity in the schools and enrollment capacity affected by enrollment and attendance and all of that. It took on a new name. There wasn't, we went through changes on the board, and so I don't think people really fully understood what we were doing. And so I just want to be careful not to just pick up where we left off with Finance Committee, but more so really identifying, is this a priority? And I'm not saying it isn't, but is it a priority? Where are we now? And really building out this process a little more so that it really fits kind of where we are now, or it meets our needs for where we are now, not just picking up. So I don't know. Did I make sense?
Sure. Yeah, you said a lot.
Okay.
You said a lot, and I think you make sense. I think that you offered a great historical perspective, and I will just add that it came up in policy because we were talking about an attendance policy, and I think we were talking about it for elementaries and high schools, and so I think it's always been something that has been of interest, particularly to the public, but it came up to us in policy, and it was kind of like, you know what, we really need to take some action. I think Board Member Morosky usually talks about how we say we're going to do something, but then we don't ever have a follow through with that. So it was just kind of, it was just to give a little bit of teeth to that. But I do agree that having a historical perspective, and that is actually on the agenda, will add some context. But I think that the conversation is definitely necessary.
Yeah, I think too, when we talk about the charge of this committee, clearly this committee as an ad hoc committee really does help to give it a different kind of context, because I struggled with the fact that it was in policy, because I didn't see that as a policy function. We have policies impact everything we do. I also didn't think it was a finance committee concern. And so that's another question that I pose to the committee in terms of how we approach this. This topic, in my opinion, is similar to how we've been addressing transportation. Transportation, because of sort of the concerns that we had and the problems that we experienced, became a full board discussion. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is a full board discussion at this point, since we have ad hoc, but I do think that the charge has, again, and I'm repeating myself, the charge really has to be very clear. It has to be based on kind of where we are at this point in time. And so a lot of the things that I've seen that have come through the committees is we're sort of picking up where we left off, and we're moving forward with that. And I don't know that that makes practical sense for us to do that.
Yeah.
I agree. But I think, honestly, a topic like this and a topic like transportation transcends all of the committees on some level. So I can see where the concern would be, hey, this came up in policy, but it's also come up in finance, but it's also come up in some semblance to student achievement. So I think forming the ad hoc committee was always the charge of policy. It was never to keep it in policy. In fact, I think that was Board Member Morosky's suggestion, is that we form the ad hoc committee to do this. And I agree that we need to have a charge that's very clear, tying it to the strategic plan.
We have a charge.
Yeah,
it's
I
a
thought
sentence.
We have what?
We have a charge, and we voted on that charge, and it's quite specific.
Well, what is it? Because I don't know.
And maybe staff. I think we have staff watching us, participating virtually. But we passed it, and it specifically, as I said, it was about reviewing, and I don't know the verb, but it was specific to neighborhoods not our neighborhood, excuse me. It was specific, I got it right the first time. It was specific to our reviewing our elementary schools attendance boundaries. And that meant anything that was like the PK 6 and some of them actually PK 8. And I think what you're referring to is that I think, and you were very vocal, making sure that the Meridian plan was no longer called a plan, it was called a proposal. And we started calling it that, rightfully so. And the Meridian plan did divide the district in not necessarily in quadrants as we had 15 or 20 years ago, but rather it divided it as the city is organized, very frankly, in its migration and internally is that you have the west side and you have the east side. And very frankly, the interstates have almost nothing to do with that, but we've made them think that those particular highways have something to do with it. The reality for greater Cincinnati, especially when you think in terms of going up to Amberley Village or going over to Cheviot or whatever, because again, we're bigger than the city, is that the city is really organized east and west and central corridor. And that's the way people think of themselves. The people in the central corridor of our district don't think that they're West Siders or East Siders. They're not quite sure. I'm one of them. We're not sure what we are, but there's that. So I think you're right. This is a fresh start and a total new beginning. But I think the reasons for it are much the same. But I think what we need to do is start with that limited charge. The other element to this, and that's why I mentioned cans, the other element to this is this idea of finding ways to make our neighborhood schools as attractive as possible so that the greatest number of people and children within a neighborhood have a school that they want to go to, are able to go to, and don't feel that they have to leave their neighborhood to find the kind of school. I would also add, though, that our community has become very accepting and very supportive of extensive choice. So we're battling that, but I think if staff could produce, and we passed it when we created the ad hoc committee, there's a sentence or two that maybe give us some insight into that charge. But it's really about reviewing our elementary attendance boundaries. And frankly, seeing if any of them actually, and which ones do, actually match neighborhood boundaries. I'll use our example for Vice President Jones and me is College Hill. College Hill as a neighborhood is divided east-west along Hamilton Avenue. And then we tell people in College Hill, go to your neighborhood school, and we send a third of our kids to Mount Airy. So, and I don't know if that's good or bad, and if it's because we wanted to mix kids up or we were trying to achieve other things when those lines were drawn. But this is why we have to start. And I'm totally with you, Carolyn, that this has to be a brand new, fresh start with nothing predetermined as to where we're going to get.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I for me, what I'm struggling with, and trust me, I know we've had this conversation about boundaries, but what I'm struggling with is that there's so much that has happened from the point we started to now that I'm wondering, in terms of relevance. I hear what you're saying. I don't dispute it, but I'm thinking, so given where we are now, how do we shape this? How do we shape this so that it's meeting our needs in the community? And I tried to go back to read as much as I could of the historical piece, and I wasn't finding anything that was sort of that helped me to better understand kind of how we got from the beginning point to where we are now. I haven't been able to find that. And so it would be helpful to me. So whenever we start talking about if we are going to have more on the historical review, that might help me some around it.
And I think one way that we stay focused and move forward is by remaining true to the charge that we're committed to moving forward. So you got the historical perspective. The staff is going to be able to report that. We've got community input. Let's take our charge and then stay focused on what we're charged to do rather than.
Yes, and I do want to make one more point though, because I'm so happy that folks in the community are here, but I did read something, and I don't know what document it was, that said that this had been community tested. And I don't know that it has been.
Are you talking about historically?
Historically, that it had been community tested. And so I don't know what that meant.
Was that with regard to the strategic plan? Planning?
I don't know. I don't know what it meant.
I can add that. And it was in student achievement. And I think Mr. Davis might remember some of this stuff too, or former member Bates, or current member Mr. Morosky. The overall piece has not been fully, let's say the stuff we don't want to get to yet and don't want to talk to or talk about. Some of that was dealt with. When we created CANS, that area was fully informed, including the community councils and all kinds of other community activity. Yes, right. Good point. And so that developed that north central piece. And then once you develop that north central piece by forming CANS and you did that community work, it was then that you might have it impact Pleasant Hill, Mount Airy, possibly even Chase once you start arranging. But that didn't happen. It stopped at forming CANS and including the Spring Grove Village. The other piece that has been discussed, and we are taking action on this, though nobody can remember that this actually happened, apparently, and it predates, I think, where Carolyn's agenda or attendance to membership, was the east side, where we had under-enrolled magnets, over-enrolled neighborhood school, PRM, and where we had, if you will, great confusion over a long period of time about Madisonville and about Kennedy Heights. And the Kennedy Heights one dealt back all the way back to facilities master plan. And Madisonville, it was a real issue of getting the families in Madisonville not to leave Madisonville for some of our magnets and to try to stay there. So what happened was that the committee that looked at it, and I do believe the board has now any number of times agreed to it, we decided that to recommend that we not redo any new boundaries for PRM, because it was so successful and it was so endeared to the community and the community owned it. So that's why we are expanding the slow pace that it's happening, the building itself. And then the rest of that was, should Woodford actually, since it's under-enrolled, which, by the way, Woodford has been a charter, I mean, not a charter, but a magnet, but more particularly, more than half of our neighborhood schools are seriously under-enrolled and are not affordable for us.
And that's where my line of thinking is like, we know that some of our schools are under-enrolled, and there are lots of things that have been impacted since we really were in the thrust of this. Yeah. And so some of that I think we do need to revisit.
So so the point is, it has been community tested when we formed CANS. It was community tested on the east side, and we still, on the east side, are still having issues in some of those neighborhoods regarding enrollment. And so there has been board committee work on both the east side cluster, so to speak, that I just mentioned, and definitely north central. And we know that we addressed part of our problem on the west side when we purchased Mercy, because on the west side, what was determined was that our Montessori community was saving our butts on the west side. And now we have a severe challenge from the charter companies coming in and trying to attract our kids away on the west side. But so I think that part has been community tested, but again, not in this overall. And nobody should ever think that anything is going to happen some giant way without that kind of testing, or more particularly, everybody needs to understand things are going to be grandfathered for a while, or whatever kind of changes, we have to find a way to make it to accommodate our families. So, and I will argue that this did belong in both policy because of enrollment, that is policy. And I will say that the transportation and the growth thing got assigned to finance when we did the strategic plan, and we divvied that up, and that's what appears in our protocol. But I want a fresh start to begin at the beginning, not to quote Sound of Music or something. Although that would be good.
a lot of when we're considering buying Mercy. Oh my God, you should be able to find everything Eve just said again in that discussion about buying Mercy. And the only thing that Eve left out was the conversations that we had over and over about Schroeder and John P. Parker.
Mhm.
And Schroeder and John P. Parker present a particular racial issue for this district that we have to address. Madisonville is growing white, and John P. Parker ain't getting none of them parents. I think policy is perfect because I think the Cincinnati School District has had some kind of policy to get some white people from Madisonville to John P. Parker. Right now, we just sit around and say, oh, it's happening. But we have no direct strategy. I asked the superintendent about enrollment, like who is in charge of getting some white people from Madisonville to go to John P. Parker? Well, you got to figure that out. And the same thing is going to happen with us at Schroeder. Because right now it's an enigma. People say, hey, it used to be Paideia. Nobody knows what Paideia means.
Well, it isn't Paideia anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
This I know.
And neither is Woodford.
This I know.
Right,
But
okay.
you know, but that's what people say. They say, it used to be Paideia. And it is not. And we're not doing, I think, to Woodford and PRM, beautiful. I don't know that I could really give a district a lot of credit for the work that those parents and residents did in Pleasant Ridge, but I will. I don't think we're doing that or have that kind of energy in Madisonville and Upper Kennedy Heights, wherever. What is that neighborhood? Schroeder's name?
Pleasant Ridge?
I think Kennedy
Is
Heights.
it-
It's like the bottom of Kennedy Heights.
It's kind of on the border.
Bottom.
But
Madisonville, Kennedy Heights,
Right.
yeah.
I don't know. We had that energy.
yes.
Yes, and we have a whole
Exactly.
township.
You're right.
It's our only township that we have the whole
Right.
township.
That's right.
I think that's a missed opportunity. I sat on this board for 2 years and never ever talked to anybody at Columbia Township. I'll go talk to somebody today.
We don't actually have all of Columbia Township.
What part is that?
Right.
We're
This-
out
Every place
in
we see that.
between Marymount and Ferris Park.
Is it,
Is also
how many streets is that?
I think it's the neighborhood I grew up in, which
Yeah.
is the only reason I know it. I just had like 100 houses, and then some of like Walton Creek,
That's
which
right.
is maybe
You're
another
right.
50 houses.
And ever so often, there's another street that says, can we leave, please? Can we leave? No.
That's the problem with 5 different communities.
Yeah.
Yes.
My last point, Dr. Moffitt, is, and throughout this whole conversation, it's very elementary school driven. That's the only conversation I remember us having back then. I hope that your ad hoc committee can continue on to address high school.
Exactly. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I really believe, and I wanted to come here today and say it on record, that I believe it's an urgent matter for Cincinnati Public Schools to get our kids back to neighborhood high schools. And if we don't, we're going to continue to lose kids to gun violence. I wanted to be on the record. I want to make sure that's on the record because I've heard a lot of talk about safety and all this stuff, and I work in it, but I don't see the Cincinnati Public Schools addressing it like we could. And one way we could address it, I see, sis. I'm coming to you. I'm gonna shut up because I promised myself I was only gonna say so much. One way we could do it is addressing the good old way, the good old days. You live in Avondale, you go here. Right? It worked then. It is still working now, by the way. So you take the Avondale kids, 45229. We go primarily to Woodward. All right. Back in my brother's day, it was shoes. But right now, I got all 45229s. We only go to 4 schools. And then there's a trinkle that go to all these other schools. I'm not saying make that trinkle go to Woodward or those 4 schools. I'm saying you got to do something with that trinkle to make sure they're happy. But it should not be the district's policy that a kid in Avondale can go to Taft because Taft is technology high, because that's a lie.
Okay, and
Okay,
if I
so-
could, I really have to make a point
No,
to this,
I just want you to know
Okay.
this is the last point.
I-
on that,
I know,
'cause I agree with you.
but Mr. Davis said a mouthful because I think that's what I was saying in terms of how we, in our charge, where are our priorities? And I hear Ms. Bolton, the emphasis on neighborhood schools because that's where we were. I agree 100% with Mr. Davis in terms of thinking the high schools, because we all know that once our kids get to 6th grade, parents start looking for other options. If they can't get into Walnut and Clark and all of those schools, they don't go to our high schools. And that's why I want to reference the historical concept, the historical conversations about this, where we were originally talking about the focus being on high schools. And it had to do with, it did start there.
I just have to respond to something
Okay,
you said.
but
So hold on one second.
But wait a minute,
I want you to finish your thought.
I'm going to finish my
Absolutely.
point. But that's why I'm saying I don't want to pick up where we left off, because we have to think about all of these as part of our charge. And the original conversation started with looking at high schools and how we work to bring people and have the high schools become more of a choice for our community. So that's all I wanted to say, is that needs to be part of our
I will say that
reset.
I will say that
Hold on
at
a
that
second.
time, at that time, we were not. I think the quote was, more than half of our neighborhood elementary schools are under enrolled. So at that time, she's talking about when this conversation started, and I even said what I think. I even said what I personally think is urgent is for us to discuss the high school. I said that. But I want you to know, if you don't get this elementary school problem worked out, you're not going to have no high schools to discuss. And this under capacity component should be what makes you guys meet. Because Ozzy's not going to be coming back to a lot of these meetings. I want y'all to know I don't do that. I get paid for this. So I think what you guys could be coming back to meet about has to be elementary, because you got to get this under capacity thing down, because they're hey, I was about to say his name, but we on record. Y'all friend, he worked for one of them charter people.
You need to move.
Okay,
Brian,
so what
Brian
we want
Neal,
to do?
no, Brian Neal is a monster. Brian Neal is a good friend of mine, Accelerated Grade Schools. He's a monster. He's out there working y'all neighborhoods. They're getting some of my former AYC kids to talk about charter school in Bond Hill. Hey, y'all, I hate this stuff, but I'm not going to be out here fighting for free. So y'all got to have a plan to fight these people coming after our kids. We under roll. Look at y'all. Look at that little
So
kid.
what I will say, let me just.
I'm going to shut up for real this time.
Okay. So
Yeah, you're going to be out of order.
we know that that's not true. But what I'm going to say is that when we talked about this in policy, and we're going to move on. We were talking about Hughes, and we were talking about high schools, and we kind of trickled it down to elementary schools. But it was to talk about our high school piece as well. So let me just refresh.
No, I have to respond to something.
One more.
And I only do this, I'm saying it to that side of the room mostly, because we have two former board members sitting over there. This charge that we are living with to get a fresh start was the only charge we could get through a board vote, because there was resistance about us creating this committee. And that's the great irony of this entire discussion. So I do think I look at this as a fresh start. You will never see me moving slowly, except when I walk or try to run. But so I'm happy to get to some distant land where we already were at some point in time. But this is the charge, and this is a great place to start, in part, too, because the city council and other organizations are very involved as well in the whole idea of refreshing the neighborhoods and working in partnership. So I think we're at a great discussion.
We're at a great place.
Go for it.
Clearly, this is a passionate topic.
So you still want to be chair?
So, I'm like, see, I told you guys, I came into this. So definitely lots of history, lots of passion. And so Ozzy, I know, is going to be back. Let's, again, let's move to, well, we had legal counsel's historical review of boundary lines. Susan, are you here representing the historical perspective? Okay. I know I probably wouldn't want to jump in on that one either.
Let's get to Jeremy.
So that's
Do you want us to call him?
I text.
I don't even think he's in town.
I don't even know. Oh, okay. Is he? Does he happen to be online? Okay. So let's move to. We'll table that for next month.
Because the history is not going to change.
No, and it's super important. Review City of Cincinnati's recognized neighborhood boundary line. Do you have
Good.
anybody from the staff for that?
Yeah, we have Jer.
So I'm definitely done with the presentation style, and I know not all of the committee members got to see this system before, so if you don't mind, I'll take the quick 30-second kind of
Absolutely.
fill in.
Yeah.
In the past, for most of the boundary discussions, attendance discussions, enrollment discussions, from a visualization standpoint, we would pay a third-party company to create what we called the red dot maps, which would show where all the students went from a particular school, but they were very limited because it was a static picture that we couldn't interact with, and you could only produce so much data into one snapshot before it just became useless, right? So in the last year, we've for the district's benefit of getting additional data around those points, but it has turned out to be what we think is a good tool for the work of this committee, is a new system for our GIS and boundary mapping that allows us to access a lot more data in a dynamic way. So really, this is to facilitate the work of the committee that we can show. For example, what I've pulled up now is, the blue line around Pond Hill you see is the CPS defined boundary. But you can see in the gray areas with the dotted lines are the actual city's recognized neighborhood boundaries based on the city's recognition of that authority. So we can get a little more detail there. On the right, you can see where we have the entire district pointed out. And then this allows us to dynamically look at, if we wanted to look at a particular set of students, to Mr. Davis's point when he was talking about J.P. Parker, if we wanted to pull up J.P. Parker, we could look and see at J.P. Parker the boundary lines where all the kids attending that school is, and then break it down by ethnicity. In the prior, in the prior work of this, we would not have been able to show all that dynamically in a way that the board could use in a working method. With this system, we can. So ultimately, I'm kind of here just to facilitate the work of the committee as you direct, as what information and data you want to have available to see.
On the Bond Hill one, there's 30 schools we have or so that actually are people actually by name even, they're in a neighborhood as such. Whether that's true or not anymore, I don't know. But you said like Bond Hill, we have Bond Hill Academy, and you said the blue line. Could you show us a little bit more of what the attendance boundary for Bond Hill Academy is versus what the city recognizes? I mean, I think that's, help me out.
Can they
Sure.
see this online, Rob?
No, this is there's kind of a fine line there as opposed to what we want to present out, because at some point, if we look at specific student data, this would allow us to get down to the point of seeing a specific student's address and location.
Okay.
So I would be very hesitant for us to display this at a public,
Sure.
to broadcast it, just depending on the data we get into, unfortunately.
So what's the blue line?
The blue line is the CPS's defined attendance boundary.
For
So that's
Bond Hill
for Bond
Academy
Hill Academy.
only.
Correct.
And
you
what's
can
the
see
white line?
Those are the neighborhood divisions. So for Bond Hill, which would be this is the neighborhood in pink, is what the city defines as a neighborhood. And then you can see the outline of the overlap. But for example, the CPS attendance boundary has a little bit of a cutout here up into the Roselawn neighborhood. It's cut into the Bond Hill neighborhood slightly. It crosses over into what the city defines as Paddock Hills. And again, you can see that it has cutouts in Paddock Hills. So you can see that it's just a good visualization of what the exact boundary looks like versus the city's boundaries of that neighborhood.
Claire, I just need clarification. The cutouts that you are referencing represent what? I mean, those are CPS
cutouts.
Okay.
Correct. So
I just wanted
to
make sure I was clear about that.
Living at an address located within this block would be attending Bond Hill.
Gotcha.
Correct. And again, these are the cans we'll look at separately because it's very complicated.
Yeah.
That's.
But you can see like this one is for Carson. Same thing. The blue attendance line is the CPS's defined boundary. And you can see where it crosses over into East Price Hill, into parts of Westwood, for example. And these are all can be broke down individually, again, to whatever the committee would like to see.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I'd be even interested to look at, Ozzy brought up Parker.
Oh, yes,
Is
please.
that the,
That's part of the college hill discussion.
yeah.
So it would be Pleasant Hill School.
Well, it looks like I may have missed College Hill, so we'll do we'll do it on the other side.
There's College Hill Fundamental, and there's, which is a
Hill.
magnet,
Pleasant Hill.
and then there's Pleasant Hill Academy, which is the neighborhood school.
I think we even talked about that during
Mhm.
the policy meeting about how kids on the
Sorry,
one
just
side
settling.
of
Which
North
one do we want to
Bend,
pull
Well,
up?
that,
If you pull up Pleasant Hill,
kids
Because that is the neighborhood school,
east
allegedly.
of North Bend Road go to Pleasant
Mhm.
Hill, but then west of North Bend Road go
School
to
in the
Mount
Mount
Airy.
Airy.
But they could live North
Yeah.
Bend.
like,
West North Bend.
yeah,
Well, yeah.
like where I live, and I know even I had this, and I was shocked. I live 5 minutes away from College Hill. My daughter lives a block away from me. She has 2 little ones. Mount Airy. You know where I live,
Stupid.
right? So and I was like, that doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense.
I get that. I do get that, Eve.
And we had a long
Yeah,
discussion about
hallelujah.
You know, you have to personal.
Well, sometimes that's
That's Pleasant Hill.
Correct.
you'll notice
That-
it goes down into Finlater Gardens, and even kids get on a bus and go past their neighborhood school, which
Since
is
we're
Winton
just
Hills
talking-
Academy.
Since we're not really talking about specifics, is it possible that we could just show that map just so that people can see what we're talking about? I mean, we're not getting into students. I just am wondering if we could show the public, because some people couldn't be here, and if they could see what we're seeing, that would be helpful. Just no student.
Give me one
nothing-
second. I'll pull it up on my laptop and I can share it from here.
Okay,
Perfect.
that sounds good.
Unfortunately, can't share the
Yeah.
board.
And Pleasant Hill is a good one to show because of
It justifies our work right
of
there.
Winton Hills and Pleasant Hill.
And that also impacts Winton Hill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've got Mount Airy, Pleasant
Because
Hill,
that's the
and
one you
Winton Hill.
raised a couple of
Mhm.
months ago, is that the kids getting on the bus
Right.
in Winton Hills. And ironically, or interestingly, at least 3 years ago, I think Winton Hills was scoring better than the Pleasant Hill school was, which was great. And that's good, but part of the justification of these cutouts, it's just ridiculous in the north central part.
So I have a question while Jeremy's pulling this up. from
Can you
a
verify
historical
that's being shared? Rocky?
perspective?
Okay, so on the
Okay.
screen over there, you can see that I'm sharing the same
Okay.
view there.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So Pleasant Hill is the blue? Is that what you're showing?
I can't either, Ginger. I can't see a thing.
We're going to probably have to,
This one he's casting just for the public, so that way they see.
Okay.
It's the same thing he's casting over here.
That's the one.
No, that's what we're talking about. Yes.
ironically.
So
Are
then
you-
we can go in pretty far, but obviously you can't see the whole. So you just let me know what
You
side.
can
What
draw a
part.
line around the College Hill boundary and
It's blue.
district.
It's
The blue,
the blue
yeah.
line.
This is Pleasant Hill. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like I have College Hill.
But that would be, because that's,
College Hill Academy.
No, but I mean within the system to outline the blue.
That's Pleasant Hill's outline.
Oh,
That's
This is
Pleasant
Pleasant
Hill.
Hills outline.
'Cause-
Unfortunately, I don't have the College Hills
It's
not
a
available
magnet.
for me to filter. So
But
okay.
where would, so Winton Hills is not within those blue lines.
part of it
Well,
is.
you can see it
And
down at the right.
that's what I'm trying to say. That's one of those cutouts or something.
It's on
Winton,
there.
yeah, Winton Hills, just
Oh,
from knowledge,
you can't.
I can tell you is basically this cutout right here.
Oh.
See this
Okay,
small
gotcha.
cutout. That is
Okay.
Winton Hills.
Gotcha.
And then College Hill is that little star. Jeremy, can you circle it? Not circle it, but can you make
Point
the
to it.
cursor go around it? Because they just can't see it that far. That's all.
Right here?
That's Winton
That's
Hills
Winton
right
That's
there.
Winton Hills.
Can you go to College Hill? Can you circle College Hill?
College Hill is here.
No, I mean the school.
Well, it's technically here. Sorry.
All those kids in one hill. Pleasant.
Half of the kids in Winton Hills go to Winton Hills.
Hills,
And I don't
and
know
the
if that's
other half
half.
go to
And
Pleasant
half
Hill.
of them go up the hill on
They
Winton
get
Road,
bused.
turn left onto North Bend, they go to Pleasant Hill.
It could be
I think
this
everybody
is
thought
the
we were doing them a favor or something.
the problem is that they could be neighbors, live on the same street,
And go to different.
and go to
schools.
different schools, and
And
some
they
have to
do.
get bused,
Winton
and
Terrace.
some get to walk, and that's a
Can we
problem.
see Winton Hill?
Give me for standing up.
Sorry.
No,
But-
this is, everybody,
It's not
the
that
work that staff has done to give us this tool to, I mean, this does date back to trying to figure out what to do about Fairview and making the red dot maps. I
But
mean,
that
so
that
this
little
is-
thing is
this
Winton Hills.
The Cropper.
That's right, Rob.
Is that only? That's so small. Is that only?
That is
Basically.
It's basically just Winton
So
Hills,
you
right?
divided that community up.
Mhm. And they're busing half the
I
kids.
guarantee taxpayers don't know that. That don't make no sense.
And they're really, when we went to visit, they're full, but some of their kids, they can see them. They can see them right there, and they just need a walking school bus. But they're full. And some of the kids are neighbors, cousins, and they go to different schools.
And that does have to be a discussion too, about how we are saying what's full and what isn't.
Exactly.
And the reason
That's
why
that's part of the joke too in all of this.
and
So
part-
capacity is an
It's
issue.
crucial.
capacity.
And that's what I'm saying in terms of where we start. We have to look.
We have
because things
stars
shift,
of capacity.
you know.
And in policy, I brought up how we live in the South Avondale. The reason why this transcends committees is because we live near South Avondale, but I wanted my kids to go to Pleasant Hill because they needed to go to their grandparents after school. My mom lives in College Hill. We got no transportation because it was neighborhood school to neighborhood school, but we would have gotten transportation to go to a magnet school. That's not equitable. And you're encouraging by the very nature of how that's written for students to go to magnet schools if transportation is your issue.
Yeah.
And I think that that's unfair. And so that was how we had this deep, in-depth discussion, because I said, no, I lived that. I lived that if a parent wants their kid to go for babysitting issues, then they get no transportation, and that's not fair. So that's how that is how this conversation can transcend policy to finance to student achievement. And so I agree that we definitely need to have our charge be very clear. But really, the work is so much larger, and it's going to expand beyond what we're going to start. I fully anticipate we're going to start off talking about this, and it's going to go and be morphed into other things. But Jeremy, thank you so much for that. We're going to definitely keep you involved with us because we need you.
Did somebody ask about J.P. Parker?
Yes,
too?
we did.
Yes.
J.P. Parker was a good. Can you look that one up? That's just as crazy.
It's worse. And we
Don't
tell
forget
people,
that this
That is
So-
really crazy.
probably no one.
oh yeah,
Hey, Jeremy, I have a question. Is it possible to put our school boundary lines on top of or overlay with the city's neighborhood line? I mean, I see that on the same one, but I'm thinking, is there a way to really kind of see what, I don't really know what. Okay. Feeling like some kind of way the community needs to see that in this particular instance, Madisonville is a small little chunk, but John P. Parker is really servicing, from what I can tell, multiple communities.
Yeah.
well, you know, and even using the cans thing, even if you redraw, and granted that was technical as you, because that's neighbors, some neighborhood groups, community groups, are in dispute with each other as to which street is in which neighborhood. I mean, that's classic, that's typical, and that was part of the cans issue. But even if you tried to assemble geographically full neighborhoods instead of this cutout here, cutout there,
Right.
like all of Kennedy Heights and some other part of another neighborhood, all of it goes somewhere. If you even start thinking about our neighborhood schools as being our walking schools, and talk about it if it's walkable. I mean, because poor Carolyn and Kareem have had to hear me say this. We are no longer a neighborhood system and a magnet system. We have multiple school systems within this district.
And
There's
they're
a
not-
monitor.
it's
And
an
we
equity
don't,
issue.
yes,
It
and we
is.
don't
It
budget
really is.
properly because we're still doing the that's a two-tier system. No, it's you have 4 schools that are strictly international, for sure. You have an entire Montessori system from PK to 12. You also have a whole new kind of career sort of piece that's going to need to be dealt with choice. You have 110 or so preschool classrooms. So we have several systems within the system, and this just confuses us. And these cutouts, I'm sure, were motivated by good reason and by law.
I was going to ask
But
about,
gosh,
from a historical perspective, how did we get to the cutouts? And the cutouts don't seem to be consistent. So how did the district decide, hey, we're going to just take this little street right here and nothing else? How did that happen historically? I'm asking 2 long-term board members.
and then you have another board member over there that's longer
Dr.
term.
Rhodes,
I'm thinking about something else.
how did the district get to their line? Yeah, you can answer.
Loud parents, haphazardly by, exactly, squeaky wheel with grease.
Okay.
And I'd also say there's racial the needs that needed to have diversity, that when some of these things were done, it was required to do that. And so I think the loud parents is absolutely, but something as simple as Hyde Park School, and the vast majority of the kids at Hyde Park School actually live in Oakley, or if I recall. And the reason that Evanston part was cut out, even though you have Blue Ribbon Evanston School or what have you, is because, and this will sound terrible, public, I'm sorry I'm going to say it, is that there was great consternation about even creating Hyde Park because it was going to be predominantly white.
Yes.
Which was, it was to get 4 votes initially for Hyde Park because of the way it would look. So then you had the cutout to try to do that. I just think this fresh start is where we kind of need
the fresh start is good. And I just to add to that, I think, and I used to, listen to how Melanie explained it. It really goes back farther, even predates when we implemented magnet programs because of the discrimination law, and all of that lawsuit and all that. And we were trying to really figure out, I wasn't here, but I don't know if you were here, Ginger, but at that time, but we were trying to figure out how to make them more racially balanced. And that it's as simple as that.
Sure.
But what it has evolved in now is a system where we're creating more inequities, trying to add value to the schools and doing whatever, but it's, it's morphed into something different.
The neighborhoods have also evolved.
Yes.
And so even though we had a system that's 20 years old, we have not kept up with the segregation of the cities. So that's super important as well. It's Dr. Rhodes.
I wanted to
do is a couple of things. One, I still circle back to the question of all of this issue and concern about what bodies go where. What is the ultimate question or problem the committee is trying to get the board to solve? And I would say specifically, is it academic performance? Is it equity? Is it the school culture? And I want to select school culture out of that to highlight because, the other element of where parents decide to send their kids, there could be a way to get data on this if you don't have it already, but maybe you have data. There's a lot of selections that are done for the purpose of avoiding a certain dysfunctional school, or one that is seen that way, whether it is as much that way as people think or not. Neighborhood residents who aren't involved with schools, and even after we retire, there is community scuttlebutt about that school and some experience and so on. And we have to somehow come up with a way for people to go towards what they want and not have this very negative feeling that comes with trying to escape something that you think will be harmful or inadequate for your child. And so I guess I'd like to introduce the element of, let's look at these pariah schools that everyone seems to want to escape from. Not everyone, but I want to make the point that it's not just white parents who escape those schools. It is black middle class parents also. And it reduces the kids who remain there, whose parents have fewer options to move, fewer options to do transportation. It reduces those children's access to other kids that have a little more than they do. And I was a kid like that from a poor family. And I went to a school in town because there was actually no school on the south end of the county, which was mostly black. And I found middle class friends in that school, and I visited their homes and realized that everybody doesn't have to live like we live. And for a poor kid, that's a rich experience to just have. That is part, that economic diversity is an important part of the mix. So I guess I'm pleading for some examination of schools that everybody knows are inadequate or sees as inadequate. And we have that problem in College Hill. Pleasant Hill is seen as a very dysfunctional school. It has its assets, but it has some serious questions about the culture. I have some serious questions about the culture of that school. As our committee, for example, has gone into all of the schools in College Hill and begun that work with them, the committee, not just me, have observed the way kids are treated when they come into the main office, even with other adults there. And the leadership protocols, be they intentional or not, that go on there, and the availability of administration there. And some of these issues have been brought to the district before. So these things are not board matters, but if the policy issue here ultimately is to offer a really good education to every kid that comes into the district, regardless of income, race, etc., then the functionality of the school has to be addressed. And that is a matter for the administration. But my question to the board members is, what is your input to rather that analysis of these schools that people want out of? Where's the data for that? I don't know what current things are done to determine what parents are thinking about their local schools, what kids think about how they get treated at their schools. I would be interested in knowing what kind of survey data is currently being done or has been done for the last few years to determine what global things are not as we would wish them to be in school.
I think that's a good add. I think also, and it's a larger issue, just as you're pointing out, from a standpoint of that's why they invented the Vision 2020, so that you were trying to up the program. It's why, the high schools, a few years ago, they went through an advanced ed so that each of the high schools actually were ranked as whatever they're not good, but it's like this is the high school that has met all the data. I think the quality of the instruction is crucial. I think too, we've gone 3 or 4 years for all intents and purposes without any kind of report card and that's been helpful, frankly, because the report card is geared towards other kinds of school systems than ours, but you can't rely on that. I like your reference regarding economic diversity, because having followed this for a while, as we all have, if you don't have about 35% of the student population, regardless of color, regardless of ethnicity, that is middle income, economically middle class, you will see what happens. And where you have this vast amount, and it's about competition, it's about having that 30% of the kids being able to score on something or some behavior. It's mathematical. It has nothing to do with the quality and the talent of our children or how parents love them or don't or whatever. You do have to have economic diversity, or you really have a completely different set of circumstances to guide. But I am encouraged that we have a new superintendent who has rigorously and quickly put schools at the center of it by at least saying, I will visit every one of them, not because she's 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 2 hours. And we also have had 2 new board members that have made that part of there. So I think that's important. But then we also have the counterbalance of a governance piece that basically says now we're not supposed to be too involved about the school. So we're living this weirdness, but a lot of this is economic. And I think the biggest racial piece here is that where you have a diverse neighborhood, you don't necessarily have a diverse CPS neighborhood school.
That's right.
That's the biggest racial problem we have. The other piece, there are thousands less children in Cincinnati proper than there were when, let's see, which census did we just do, 2020? Than 2010, or when we invented the facilities master plan. So there's reasons for population that we have to redo this. We just can't avoid it. But I think you're right. The quality of the instruction and the success of the school has to be primary for sure.
I agree. And I support, I get what you're saying. And I think a solid examination that includes groups like yours in the community, starting from the very beginning, is crucial to that. And I think, when you spoke to, well, we need to examine why folks want to escape our schools. Well, we provide access to Walnut and Clark and all these other magnet programs, and we glorify these things, and so. Yeah, they are. I'm not saying they aren't, but I'm saying we want all of our schools to be glorified in that way. And so I hear what Ginger is saying in terms of us looking at them and the whole perception of why they're inadequate. As a fellow College Hill resident, I'm on the College Hill network and stuff, and I see these comments where folks are saying, well, what school do I send? They rarely say Mount Airy plus. They just don't. They're looking outside, and then most of the time it's Clark or another magnet school. So I'm just agreeing with what.
Okay, so I think we've got a lot of work to do. Thank
We
you
do.
for bringing it up. Yes.
I actually a school park, library next door. They could walk to academic, culture, administrative levels. It just doesn't function well. And they resent this. And this is not helping us when we go to pass a levy. It will not help us. It hasn't helped us in the past.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of work to do. And I think this committee has a lot of work to do. Let's see. It's 11:11. We are going to end on time.
Did we finish? Did whoever wanted to see the J.P. Parker, did you see enough of it?
Yeah, I think
Are you good?
That was, I'm good. I'm frustrated,
Cool.
but I'm good. So,
But that's good.
It only gets worse.
I was already frustrated. So it
Yeah.
just visually. So
I'll only be frustrated if this takes another 6 years to get this done.
it won't. We're going to at least bring awareness to it. And so moving. Lord Jesus. The next item on our agenda is quadrant school, pre-K to 6 and pre-K to 8 high schools. So do we have anybody here from staff to talk about that? Susan, are you talking about that? No?
I will try to answer any questions.
Well, I think what we're going to do is kind of table some of these to talk about next month. We're going to set our timeline of when we're going to meet and invite everyone else back and those that are watching. We did have,
This is the charge.
Thank you, Pat, for bringing this in.
Sorry,
This
it
is
took me a little bit longer.
It's
than
okay.
I
That's
gotta
all
keep
right.
going back in every meeting. Every meeting.
So this, just for the people that are not here physically, you all are getting copies of it as well. It says, motion to reevaluate the district boundary lines for elementary schools. That is the charge. Member Morosky moved and Member Jones seconded a motion that the board create an ad hoc committee to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools. So this was April 25th. And so that is clearly our charge. Are we wanting to add high schools on it? Or
No, you
just stick
can't.
with elementary schools for now?
We can
Are
get
you
the-
okay?
I'm okay with it, although, well, never mind. I don't want to complicate it, but I still feel like that none of this can happen. I heard Mr. Davis say, well, we got to work on our elementary schools to be able to improve the high schools. I don't want the high schools to be an afterthought in this. And
Sure.
I believe that our priority is to deal with the elementary schools, to draw the lines. But I think in our conversation, in our discussions, and maybe even identifying kind of a plan, a tentative plan for what we might, how we might work with the high school piece as well. But that's later down the road.
I would just suggest that after we have a couple more meetings, that we
I'm
are
not suggesting
able,
anything soon.
So that's right.
Right.
So with that
not.
understanding, then we would be able to go back and say we want to be more expansive about it. I do want to mention the quadrant piece. They used to have quadrants, and like obviously 4. I know that about math. But like an assistant superintendent did one quadrant or whatever. So that was the difference, I think, between a district-wide, and that's the difference too between the quadrant versus the meridian piece, which is east, west, and central corridor. So they gave up on quadrants. They gave up on K-8 buildings because the 7th and 8th graders were a big, hard thing to do when you're trying to get the kids, the little people, to read and what have you. And then we also, before all of that, apparently boards gave up on junior highs. So there's all these things that have been tried, but and now we're in more of the 7-12. So absolutely, it's about the whole big thing. Plus, as Ginger mentions, it's about the quality of the schools. It's about transportation. It's about equitable access. So this is a huge thing that we're doing. But this, I think, is the best starting place, and it's the only starting place that we get 4 votes or more to create the ad hoc committee.
I agree. And in all honesty, the kids that are sitting in the seats right now, along with the parents that are parenting them, are different than 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, let alone 15, 20 years ago. So we need to evolve. We need to expand our thinking and do some things differently. So
We draw
just
some
don't
lines
need
that
to-
make sense.
We don't need to push it aside for another
6 years.
no, we're not
6
going
or
to do
7.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Okay.
not. So is there any, yes, ma'am.
That makes sense.
Sure.
One, there is
Available from Eric and other, clearinghouse sort of resources on other communities struggling with the same issue. And I think it would behoove somebody to take on the task of bringing some of those other examples, or if there are successes in ways to work things out that have been thought of elsewhere. This is not a unique problem to Cincinnati, I'm sure.
Right.
The other suggestion is Xavier has the CBI, Community Building Institute. Some of you may have been at some of their events. They recently did a thing on housing in College Hill to talk about the REITs buying up all the housing. And this is a city issue, a housing issue, along with a district issue. And I would love to see a collaborative dialogue that includes people from the city who are involved in housing issues, neighborhood issues, to make sure that some of those perspectives are brought in.
I think that makes sense. I think there's good
I think it makes sense
suggestions.
too. And in fact, we talked about the city CPS collaborative meeting that's supposed to happen sometime this fall. So that's definitely something.
So that's on the list.
Definitely. Thank you.
I'd also like to see the city help appoint other people to the sort of board so that their children could get to school, grades 9 through 12.
Okay. Any other business?
Meeting date, and then I think this is been done a little differently, but the charge did say including the community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is something, if we have people that are interested in continuing to participate.
So does a Wednesday work? Does the second Wednesday of the month work? Does this time work?
No. I see at least one had, let's see.
Second Tuesday.
We
Well, the
just-
second week in August, we have,
We chose this one because last week was the holiday and people were.
I only had to cancel my aquatone stretch one word.
I think that's probably more information than we probably needed, but.
Trying to make you jealous.
Don't cancel.
Yeah, you did.
So what about the first?
Wednesday does work for
Wednesday.
me, except when we have Cal.
No, I'm okay. That's what I'm more concerned about. If we could, I would be okay with even doing it on Cal if we could just do it at a different time so that we don't have to leave and come back.
Okay, well, let's do Wednesdays.
So are we saying? Okay,
Second
Did our new
Wednesday.
committee members, are they cool with the
Um,
Wednesdays?
This time worked for me because
Right.
I wouldn't need that.
So our cows are normally from 4 to 5:30. If we were to keep the meeting around the same time, it would be 30 to 4.
That's committee of the whole, right?
Mm-hmm. We could. Do you want to do it after the cow? Which would be.
I don't care. It doesn't.
I can
5:30
do,
or
I can
6:30.
do whatever, but I would like, if it's beyond the workday, that it impacts staff, but it would also help get community participation in some way, shape, or form. And it's early for participation, frankly. I mean, not just the time 10 o'clock, but we're gathering what it is that we need to know, which,
But you all can gather it too. Yes.
does that,
Oh, that's right. If
Let's-
we
let's
do
not
an
do that.
executive session, it's usually right after Cal.
So, let's just play. Let's take it August.
Yeah.
Let's look at August rather than set something standing.
We could do it in the day,
Yeah, because it's still the summer.
yeah,
So,
do the first Wednesday, does that work?
well, we have the teacher
Teacher
induction on the
induction is that
3rd.
day. Which is not, I mean, that, it would be bad to do it that day. We're not gonna be, are folks staying for the whole teacher
No.
induction? day?
Uh-uh.
But
So
I
we'll
actually,
be done by
I have a,
9 o'clock.
We're
have a
supposed to
meeting.
go
Oh,
and
we
leave.
have a meeting.
Can we do the 10th? August the 10th?
Are we
Yeah.
now into, there's committee of the whole on the 10th.
That's
well,
fine.
oh, that's in the evening.
Can-
It's. Do you want to do it in the daytime?
But that school, when does school start? I want to make sure that we can get folks at the table here on that day.
Can you do it during the day?
I can.
Okay.
yeah.
Can we do a 10 still?
On the 10th, I can do it.
And then we need to change it to after hours.
Okay. So our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, August the 10th at 10 a.m. And we'll find another day and time for September, but the next meeting is set. We will make certain that we have our legal counsel's historical review of boundary lines. Jeremy, we're going to invite you back to continue to
He's
talk
probably a
about.
permanent member at this point in time.
Yes, the review of the city of Cincinnati recognized neighborhood boundary lines. Is there
Can you show me
anything
that
else
map?
that anyone else would like to see for next month?
Yeah, I know this is tedious, but I want to know how big a problem this really is. I mean, we've chosen, we looked at 4 things, and each of them have problems. Is it true for all of, is it, how wide a problem is this? Because you can't fix one and without fixing the others. We found out with cans. So I'd almost like to just even spend 30 minutes to see what it looks like. I don't even know if the schools that are called the neighborhood schools like Bond Hill. Oh, it's actually in Bond Hill. That's good. I don't know that that's still the case. So I'd like to see going down, and that would include the elementary magnets and the elementary Montessori's as well, because they have different attendance boundaries.
So what do you?
I'd like to see
Medical start
This
to
one
finish.
40 minutes on that, literally.
Yeah, I would support that. And that's what I was saying earlier. Things have changed.
Yes.
You and Dr. K, that's what you've been saying too. Things look different than 5 years ago. COVID had a significant
Yeah, we
impact
lost
on
people.
things. So I do think we need to spend, and maybe 40 minutes may not even be enough, but I think it gives us a start.
Okay. So the question is, how wide of a problem is this for our district? That's the question that you asked regarding our schools, actually our neighborhood schools in their neighborhood is one question. I'm just trying to put this out so that the staff can figure out what to give us for next.
How about
next
some
week.
data on each, what the district considers to be the neighborhood school that kids can walk to, whatever. The closest thing to that in each area.
Thank you. There was just
Okay.
a confusion 3 months ago with one of some folks that what was a magnet, and what isn't a magnet, because some things didn't get kind of redone as they were done. So
I
it'd be
think-
great to see the list of, these are actually what we say are neighborhood schools. These are the magnets.
Yeah,
Okay.
And
that would be helpful.
that, just even that list.
But I think you need with that, the data on each one, how many kids, what percentage of the kids actually live within
We've got
neighborhood
that.
boundary,
Right.
and what percentage don't.
That's
That,
good.
that gives us a baseline to start.
We've got it.
And we know that. So
And
we know
I
that.
just add the capacity of that building too.
I was gonna say of enrollment
Yes.
Yes.
over
Yeah.
the district, I think.
And it'll have to be this year that we have that information for. We can't go to this coming year yet. but-
Yeah, now help me understand, because there's been a lot of data that the policy committee the policy committee has done. And I looked at some of that, and some of that has enrollment or
We've got all
attendance
that.
or whatever. So is that data still relevant for us to?
For us to use this past year as the base, it's
Okay.
still relevant because Jeremy's got it he's even got it to where the kids that live in the neighborhood, the
Okay.
kids that are coming into from outside the neighborhood, even down to which kids are special needs, because part of that issue is
Yes.
we have all these special needs units
Yeah.
spread throughout the district, and which ones are staff kids.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating.
He's able to break it down.
You really
Okay,
need a
that's-
study from the evaluation group or whatever. We are about to ask for that as a neighborhood, and I'm not sure the other community councils wouldn't be interested in seeing that too. And to say not only where are our kids going, but
Sure.
where are we getting kids from, and do it by zip code if you have to
Yeah.
to kind of ease it a
Got
little.
it.
Yeah, so Jeremy is crucial to that. And then is there a role for Susan in all of
Well,
this?
not really.
She's gonna be
'cause
gone.
Okay.
we're losing-
Oh, that's right.
Dr.
Okay.
Buffett,
Yes.
I'd like to know
Well,
what
whoever.
the marketing department's strategy is in regards to what Dr. Rose was talking about earlier, school culture and perception of school culture. So what does the CPS marketing department, what are they
That's-
doing to directly address these things?
That's a whole conversation we need to have. Because I don't think we're addressing it in the way that we need it to be. Is,
Well, I don't think marketing ever comes to any meetings.
huh?
I don't think marketing ever comes to any committee meeting.
Yeah.
Like in my time, I've never seen a person from marketing like at the board meeting. So it's almost like it's incumbent on somebody to tell staff, this is how the board community is thinking. I see this a lot of teachers too. That somebody has to tell somebody. You know, and y'all know that game with that whisper.
Telephone
And I
game,
that
yeah.
person is never the same thing.
So what is the marketing department's strategy regarding school culture, and what's the plan to
at
address?
school by school and the narrative for the district.
Yes,
Yeah, my question is, what's the board and administration's plan for
Exactly.
school culture?
And I'm gonna just it's 11:27. I want to be very respectful of time. We have two really big chunks for the next meeting. So I'm going to stop.
And
Any
they
other
are.
questions for that? Because you all talked about 40 minutes is not enough. It's only a 90-minute meeting. But is there anyone that wants to speak?
No one has made a request to speak, but you may want to ask.
Okay. This is.
Or you could adjourn.
We're going to have a very brief 30-second hearing of the public. If anyone would like to speak, raise your hand, and Rob will get you now. Otherwise, we are going to, in 2.5 minutes, adjourn. Does anyone else have any other questions that are in the room? I want to make sure that I'm respectful of time.
And make sure staff knows who was here by name, because we didn't go around the table. So
We did.
staff.
I apologize. So
No,
let's
that's all
while
right.
we're waiting,
We can do that.
let's just go around the room very very briefly. And say who came with us today to share in this. And I really want to thank you all for coming. So we've already heard from you, but we're going to definitely formally hear from you. Who are you?
Davis.
I'm Ozzy.
Good time.
Virginia Rhodes.
Carolyn Jones.
Kareem Moffitt.
Eve Bolton.
Allison Goodman. Aaron Fay.
Jeremy Gully.
All right. Still no one, Rob? We're good?
No, still no.
Okay. Well,
Adjourn while
then
you
we've
can.
done a very good job. Thank you for coming. We've done a really good job
Thank you.
at being timely.
Hey, thank you.
Hopefully you join us again August the 10th.
Please.
We're good.
James.
August the 10th at 10 a.m. See you soon.
Oh,
In person or virtual.
Thanks for this, friend.
We're adjourned.
okay.